that everybody can see my screen. I got the PowerPoint presentation up there. It looks good. So welcome to the DSHA MUHS 2020 Financial Aid Night. As we've been saying all along, we are excited to quote unquote see everybody, and I know your cameras are off. So that's gonna be our first big announcement. We've realized after doing some Zoom meetings that if we want to decrease lag time and make sure that nobody's freezing or anything, if everybody could just turn your cameras off, that'd be great. And also everyone is muted. So if you have questions, I know we had a couple people put in questions earlier, and we're going to get to all of those questions. If you have questions throughout the night as we're going, please feel free to put them in the chat function. And myself and the other counselors here, we are going to be kind of passing those questions on to our world famous professional, Susan Teerink, who we're going to introduce in just a second. So before we get started on the actual financial aid night, let's get going how we kind of start all things at Divine Savior Holy Angels and at Marquette University High School in prayer. So please follow along at home. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord, your gifts are many. I'm grateful for every one. One of the greatest gifts you've given is the gift of our child. Thank you for their life, dear Lord. Watch over them each day. May they be safe and free from hard as they go about each day. Bless them through life's trials. Help them choose right from wrong. An example be for all to see, standing tall, proud, and strong. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you all for joining us for that prayer. So quick, who are we? For those of you that don't know me, I hope all the Dashers know me by now. I am Mr. Hendricks. I'm the Director of College Counseling over at DSHA. And then I'll let Ms. Bennett and Ms. Cleary introduce themselves very quickly too.
Hi everybody, I'm Mrs. Annette Cleary, Director of College Counseling at Marquette High. Happy to be with you and very excited to see so many of you logged in tonight. Thanks.
And my welcome, I'm Connie Bennett, Associate Director of College Counseling at Marquette University High School. And this is just a really exciting program that we do in collaboration together, with each other, with our two high schools. And I know we'll be introducing Susan in a few minutes, but just to, share our gratitude for her amazing friendship and what a great professional colleague she is to us. She goes back a long time with all three of us, and so having her with us tonight is pure joy. So thank you so much, Susan, and we're excited for you to share your expertise with our families tonight.
Next, I just want to have a big welcome to our guest, the Associate Vice Provost for Financial Aid and Enrollment Services. And Susan, I feel like this keeps growing your title. You just keep getting more and more every year.
The longer I'm there, the longer my title gets.
Yeah. Susan Teerink, she's been doing the Marquette High and DSHA Financial Aid Night for as long as I've been at DSHA and longer than that, I think. She is one of the best in the country when it comes to financial aid. She really knows her stuff, and hopefully everyone got the opportunity to watch the presentation that we sent out via our two social media links. And with that being said, Susan, I'm really going to turn it over to you if you have any opening statements. Otherwise, we could just jump right in with all the questions that people sent. And again, if you have questions that maybe you didn't have a chance to fill out in the Google form, please feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get those over to Susan right now.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to meet with the DSHA families and MUHS High families. So I'm really excited to be here and glad to help in any way.
Awesome. Well, with that being said, let's just jump right into it. And we got a great list of questions from people. And again, if you have more questions or something triggers a thought, throw it in the chat, and then we'll be sure to ask Susan that question. But the first one we have is how are non-529 college investment assets assessed? Are they assessed at a rate of 5% like other parent assets?
Non-529, Brian?
Yes, non-529.
Yes. So when you watch the presentation, I tried to make a very clear distinction between how students' assets are assessed and how parental assets are assessed. So student assets, and again, let me back up a little bit. The way the federal financial aid regulations are written is that students, to the extent that they're able, and their parents are responsible for education after high school. So that said, they do look at your student's income and they look at your student's assets. And with your student, it's assessed at a straight 20%. So if they have $1,000 in a savings account, it's a straight 20%. So they anticipate that $200 would be available, or they expect that $200 would be available to help with education from the student's side. On the parental side, there are asset protection allowances and a number of offsets. So when it's all said and done, the range, it's not a straight percentage, but there is a range, and it's typically between about 5 and 6% of parental assets are considered available to help with education. Now, that said, it's really important to remember that when they're talking about assets, they are not talking about your retirement accounts nor the value of your home. So they're looking at things like, do you have stocks and bonds that aren't in retirement accounts? Do you own a second home? Those are the kinds of things that they're looking at. And again, and 529 plans, and they are assessed, but by the time all the offsets come into play, it's usually around about 5 to 6%.
Awesome, thank you.
We have another question that was posted, Susan, and it's asked, if my parents file their taxes jointly, how do they report their separate incomes?
Okay, so I'm guessing, Mrs. Bennett, that this means that the parents are divorced and that the student is just filing the FAFSA form with one of their parents. So if that's not the correct assumption, I hope whoever posted that question will put something in the chat and correct us. But in the case of separated or divorced parents, the student files the FAFSA with the parent with whom they live the most. And it's that household where that student's, that household income that the student reports. So in that case, if it's a recent separation or divorce, the parents look at their W-2s and their tax returns, and they simply look at their tax returns and say, mom made $45,000, dad made $52,000. And so you separate the income earned from work, and then, you know, that's not quite 50%, but you use that same ratio on your taxes, and that's the information. So you just do some math in terms of a ratio of mom earned this much, and that's this ratio to the taxes, dad earned this much, and you work on a ratio. So you just do a little bit of math, and you do the best you can.
So Susan, following up, it does, student does say that the parents are married, filing jointly though.
So why would they be separating out their income? That would be my next question.
I don't know. If you'd like to chat further on that one, because that's more of a unique question, feel free to chat with us and we can try and set something up too separately with Susan if you have a more private question you don't want to ask in front of a large group too.
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate that you file the taxes, or you file your FAFSA with the household where you live. So if your parents are married to one another, there is no separating out of the income. You just use your 2019 taxes for fall 2021, and actually if you use the IRS data retrieval tool, there really isn't any additional thought you have to do. You just go into the IRS data retrieval tool, say yes, I want to use it, and your information from your tax return will be taken right out of your tax return and plopped right into your FAFSA in the appropriate places. So there shouldn't be any separating out of income if the parents are married and that's to one another and living in the same household, and that's where the child is living. I hope that clarifies.
Thank you.
We have another question. I'll kind of merge them because we have a couple of this on the same vein, Mrs. Teerink. So a question about, if you plan on applying for merit scholarships, sometimes it seems that you also have to fill out the FAFSA. So we have a couple of questions that have been posted on, you know, are those directly linked? Applying for scholarships, do you have to fill out the FAFSA, or how does the FAFSA impact scholarships, if that kind of makes sense?
Sure. So the most common answer you're going to get in the financial aid world, The response is, it depends. And so I know that's very frustrating for families, but the other piece of information that I want to make sure that you have is that if you walk away with nothing else tonight, you know that you have my permission, or I'm granting you permission, if I can, that your questions are important, and you should take them to the schools where your student is applying, and you should ask them and be informed consumers. So that said, getting back to Mrs. Bennett's question about, do you have to file the FAFSA for merit-based aid? My response is, it depends. So some schools will say, for merit-based aid, all you simply need to do is complete your application for admission, and then you will be considered for merit-based aid. There are other institutions that may have some additional scholarships, while they are considered merit-based aid, may have a need component. So they're saying it is a merit scholarship, so it's probably looking at the student's academic ability, but they're also saying, but it's going to a student with high academic ability as well as financial need. So that's where I want to reiterate, be a good consumer and make sure that if the FAFSA is required for that merit-based aid, that you are completing it. But in most, or in many instances, for merit-based aid, all you simply have to do is apply for admission.
Great. Here's a question I'm assuming is on a lot of people's minds. So they've completed, or the family's completed the FAFSA, and the income data that they have from 2009 does not illustrate current income, as the pandemic and other reasons are affecting that for a lot of people. How can families now go back and edit their FAFSA to reflect what the current income is?
Oh, Mr. Hendricks, this is a really important question, because so many families have experienced either a job loss or at least a loss of income as a result of COVID-19. So there are a lot of families that are really, really hurting as they think about sending their sons and daughters to school. So as you know, from filling out the FAFSA form for fall of 2021, it is based on your 2019 tax returns. And you were absolutely correct to complete it using that information. Now, in order to go back, because schools want you to receive a financial aid package based on the most current information available, current circumstances in your life. So if you have experienced a loss due to COVID-19, what you will do, again, you filed your FAFSA using 2019, that's perfect. Now go back to the school where your sons or daughters are applying and say, call them up and say, we've been impacted by COVID-19, we have an income loss, what additional information do you need? And the schools will tell you what additional information you need to submit, and then those schools have the authority to adjust your information on your FAFSA to reflect your current circumstances. So there's nothing that you need to do with the FAFSA form, but you need to notify the schools where your child is applying. Now that said, most schools will probably need 2020 tax information. So W-2s, I think it's 2s, I never remember if it's 2s or 4s, 1099s, all of those forms come sort of towards the end of January. So the best thing that I can encourage you to do is file your taxes for 2020 as early as you can, and then talk to the schools and say, look, we've had a change in circumstances, we filed appropriately using 2019, but 2020 sure looks different. What do you need from us? And then the school will be able to help you, and they will look at your information and make an appropriate adjustment to reflect your new circumstance.
Great.
And let me just add, that's loss of income typically is considered, as well as, because again, with COVID-19, people probably have experienced some medical or expenses that are not covered by insurance. Those kind of expenses as well should be, you should talk to the school about that as well.
Susan, we have a question of, you covered in your presentation that when families file the FAFSA, they have the opportunity of listing 10 colleges to receive their FAFSA. but then they can delete them and add more if they want to. We had a question posted of, when you list the 10 colleges on the FAFSA, does each college then get to know the other 9 that your child is considering, or is that information private and not shared across colleges?
That information is private and not shared across colleges. So if they list Marquette and 9 other schools, all I know is that Marquette's on there and we have your child's information.
Thank you. That's easy.
Yeah. Brian, I think I saw a question that asked, I think when I was talking about professional judgment and the adjustments we can make for loss of income, yes, because somebody asked, do we call and ask for the financial aid office? And yes, absolutely, call the financial aid department and you can use the language that you have a special circumstance or you have a change in your income and you want to report that and what you need to do. But yeah, call the financial aid office.
So next question is, how likely are colleges to accept the CSS profile waiver request for the non-custodial parent? In this case, the non-custodial parent has never provided support and has no contact with the student.
Well, so I'm always a little bit challenged when it comes to CSS profile questions because I've never worked at a school that utilized the CSS profile. So I'm a little bit challenged and may lean on my admission colleagues to help me with that. But my experience with that is, in fact, I've had some really good experience with that, is that you have to be very clear with the school where you're, and let them know what the situation is, because they're, in the CSS profile, the way that they look at that income is that parents divorced one another, they didn't divorce their child. So in CSS does take very seriously, or a number of schools take very seriously, the non-custodial parent information. So if there's a reason why the non-custodial parent isn't able to provide information or won't provide information, my experience is that you have to be pretty straightforward about what's your circumstance. I'm not saying you have to air all of your dirty laundry, so to speak, but you have to be pretty clear. And my experience with that is a young student a number of years ago who went to Michigan, and the mother was very vague about why the dad wasn't eligible. And they came to me for some help, and I talked to the school, and they said, we need a little bit more. And here the circumstances were they didn't want to hurt the father's feelings or be divulged too much, but the gentleman had very serious mental illness and seriously had not provided for these children in years. It was all he could do to barely keep himself afloat. So I said, you have to be a little bit more straightforward with the other school and tell them what's going on, why the family, why this parent can't provide information. And, you know, so that's my experience. But Mr. Hendricks or Mrs. Cleary, can you provide more that I'm rambling on a bit here?
I would just reinforce what you said, that the experience that I've seen for our students is communication with the college is key in terms of, so it kind of goes back to your it depends answer, but communication with the colleges seems to have kind of clarified that. And I don't know if that's the professional judgment piece again that you've talked about, Susan, that the colleges can agree to then take the waiver.
Yeah, and I do think is going to depend on the college. So each college is going to look at it based on their framework of how they do financial aid. So that's why it is important to call the financial aid office at the schools you're applying to see, you know, what they absolutely need in that CSS profile waiver.
Thanks, guys.
And students, just like you are working with admission counselors within that college office, know that there are financial aid counselors as well. So as you know, as Susan shared before, when you're having questions, call the financial aid office directly, or if you have your admission counselor contact, begin with that person and they can connect you with. But Mr. Hendricks and I both worked on the higher ed side in college admissions, and so those were very, very typical questions and kind of the flow chart that we would be working with it as admission counselors as well. Susan, we have a question that just kind of maybe you can clarify. I know you covered this in your presentation, but maybe to amplify, can you share again how parent age has impact on the financial aid formula?
Oh, sure. So as I indicated, there is asset protection allowance. So the students, very simply, a straight percentage of their assets are taken into consideration. But for parents, there's an asset protection allowance as well as a couple of other offsets. But the asset protection allowance is based on the age of the older parent. So the older you are and the closer you are to retirement, the fewer of your assets are going to be taken into consideration, because the way the formula works is that the older you are, and again, closer to retirement, you're going to need those assets in your own retirement. So they're going to completely eliminate them from the formula before they determine what your family's expected contribution is.
Awesome. So a question that we're getting a lot of in a different way. So I'll try to phrase it in all the ways we're seeing. So we've heard, based on other families that have filled out the FAFSA in the past, that they may not qualify for aid. We've heard, my older sibling filed the FAFSA a couple years ago. They didn't qualify for aid. Is there any way, or is there any time for someone not to fill out the FAFSA?
Well, it really comes down to what is the family's choice. So filing the FAFSA will make you eligible, or will assess if you're eligible for need-based aid, as well as campus employment and student loans. So if you're not interested in loans and campus work, and you're not going to qualify for any need-based aid like grants, then it's really up to you whether you file or not. So typically what we encourage families to do is file it that first year, when your first child is going to school, to see if you qualify for any need-based aid. And then we often will encourage families to consider filing again at the point in time that you might have 2 children in college at the same time. Because with 2 children in college at the same time, that EFC is split between the 2 children, and they both show higher financial need at that point in time. But it really is up to the family to decide if this is something they want to do. But if you want your student to take out a student loan and have some skin in the game, as they say, you will have to file a FAFSA.
And maybe related to that, Susan, is, maybe as a family, we're choosing not to file the FAFSA, for my child's freshman year, but then our financial situation changes. The FAFSA is an annual application. So doesn't mean that a family can't file it for sophomore year, or can they even file it mid-year if something were to happen?
Absolutely. There's nothing that's preventing you from filing this FAFSA at any time during your students' first year, second year, whenever. You just have to file it before the end of the school year. So for their freshman year, you have from October 1st, all the way through until probably around 2 weeks to maybe a month before their freshman year is over. You have a long span of time to file that form if you should decide to do so. And to Mrs. Bennett's point, not only is the FAFSA an annual application, it's an individual student application. We often think that it's for the family, but it's an individual student's form. So in a case of a family that has 2 students going to college at the same time, you will be completing 2 FAFSA forms.
So kind of piggybacking off of that, it sounds like the FAFSA is kind of based on the finances of the day that you actually file it. So let's say I've been saving up to buy a car and it costs X amount. Should I buy that car before I file the FAFSA? Or is it okay to wait till after? How does that work?
Well, when you're looking, again, The FAFSA is using, the FAFSA for fall of 2021 is looking at your 2019 tax returns. But when it comes to assets, it's assets of the day that you sign that form. So if you know you're going to have a big expense, like buying a new car, and you're going to maybe deplete your savings accounts or whatever to do so, sure, it makes good sense to wait to do it after you have purchased the car or whatever it is that you're going to buy. But just remember, if you want a financial aid notification and information before your student starts their first year or first semester of their freshman year, you probably have to get that information filed in at least by March or April in order to get a financial aid award in time for the start of school.
Susan, this next question kind of relates only to half of our population tonight, and it's specifically about selective service. If male students who are at 18 years of age and filing the FAFSA have to also register with selective service, correct? And so can you just kind of review that process or that rule, just so that our the males listening to this presentation are hearing that rule?
Sure, yes. The United States government requires that males of 18 years of age or 18 years of age register for selective service. It's still a law on the books. Even though we haven't had a draft in many, many years, it's still required. So one of the things that you can do when you're completing the FAFSA form, if you haven't registered already, you can actually indicate in the FAFSA form that you would like to register and that you will be registered right through the FAFSA process.
Great. One of the rumors that's been going around is that freshman year tends to be the most generous aid packages for students. Does that decrease over the next 4 years? Is there any truth to that rumor?
Well, I'll get back to my typical answer. It depends. So there can be institutions that will front load financial aid, and then maybe you will see a decrease in financial aid over the course of the 4 years that you are enrolled. Given the environment that we're in right now, I think that would be pretty detrimental to the institution to have a policy like that. But I can't speak to every institution across the country. So there might be somebody out there that does front load aid. What we do at Marquette University is that we provide a financial aid award to a student as a freshman, and we say as long as you continue to be able to enroll and meet any specific requirements for scholarships or whatever, as long as you continue to do what you need to do and file your FAFSA form, that same aid package will follow you through for your 4 years of undergraduate study. So again, I can tell you what we do, and I can say that there might be a school out there that might front load aid, but it really depends. And getting back to my message, that's a very, very good question to ask as your children are exploring particular institutions, to ask how do you look at the financial aid package? Do you front load, or is it consistent for all 4 years? I think that's really critical that people understand what they're getting into so that you can be a good consumer.
Thank you. I have a question posted here, and I'm hoping I can relay this correctly. Is the 5 to 6% of parent assets a per year contribution for college, or is it for all the years? Or is it split among the 4 years? That's how I'm understanding the question. But again, if I'm not, please put something in the chat, but that's what I'm reading here. Does that make sense, Susan?
Yeah. So as Mrs. Bennett said, the FAFSA is an annual form. You have to complete it every year. So you're reporting your income and your assets. Your income for the 2021 year is based on 2019. The following year, it will be based on 2020 taxes. But your assets are as of the day that you complete the form. So they will be looking at 5 to 6% of your the available assets as of the day that you sign the form each year that you complete it.
Here's a question that keeps popping up as well. what about if a student has a 529 plan that's in the grandparent's name? Does that show up on the FAFSA? And is there a more effective way for grandparents to help out?
Oh, 529 plans are a great way for grandparents to help out. If grandpa and grandma are the owner, that information does not show up anywhere until the point in time that it's utilized by the student. So if grandpa and grandma hold on to their money, let's say, and give it to the student for their senior year in college, then that information is never reported. If they give it to the student for their freshman year, then when they complete their sophomore year FAFSA, there is a line item called money received not reported elsewhere, and they would indicate that they received $10,000 or some dollar amount from grandpa and grandma, and it's reported there. But it's not reported until it's actually received by the student. So it would be, again, if it's used in the freshman year, it's reported on the sophomore year FAFSA. I hope that made sense.
We have another 529 related question. Does this, I'll read it directly. If the student has $50,000 in a 529, does the school expect 20% of that for the first year? Or will a college say, oh, you have the ability to spend $50,000 already on your first year?
Okay, so here's a really important point to know. 529s, if they are owned by the parent or they are owned by the student, are considered assets of the parent. So remember, students are a straight 20%, parents are about 5 to 6%. It depends on how old you are. Age of the older parent comes into play there. So what they're going to look at is 5 to 6% of the available assets. So student 529s, if they actually are the owner and their own beneficiary, it actually is reported as an asset of the parent. So did I get at the point, Connie?
I believe so, because you're separating out the, because I'm understanding on the FAFSA, a student's assets are, they're expecting 20% of a student's asset, correctly? But the 529 is under the parent asset. Correct. So it would only be 5%.
Roughly 5%.
Okay.
Of, if it's 50,000, 5% of 50,000 is going to be it's going to go into the calculation as expected to be available to help with college. Whether you use it or not is up to you, but it's going into that calculation to say, hey, as a family, you at least have this available as a resource. Mm-hmm. So remember that, parents, because it's really 529s, when parents have to report these assets, it's all of the 529s. So if you have assets for your son, or 529s for your son and 529s for your daughter, and your son and daughter each have their own accounts, you have to add those all together and report them as a parental asset. And the reason for that is that the beneficiary of a 529 can be changed at any time. So that's why they all have to be reported as a parental asset. And again, you want it reported as a parental asset because you have the offsets, the asset protection allowance, the age of the older parent, the different offsets, and then it's roughly 5% versus the straight 20 as a student.
Susan, I want to go back to grandparents for a second. So if a grandparent is not, if they don't have a 529 plan, but if they're just going to be cutting a check every year for the student, how does that differ when it comes to filing the FAFSA?
It's the same situation. So once the money is received by the student, so let's say grandma writes a $2,000 check for the freshman year, then when the student files their sophomore year FAFSA, they would indicate $2,000 in the money received, not reported elsewhere column. So it doesn't matter if it's 529 or a check from grandma, it's just all reported in that area, on that line.
Thank you. Let's shift a little bit from 529s. I know I'm going to kind of refer our families back to the recording presentation that we shared in advance, because this next question, there was a really, really helpful infographic in Susan's presentation that the recording was offered. And the question is, I apologize if this was asked, but if parents are divorced, do both fill out separate FAFSAs, or is it just one household? So Susan, if you could just kind of quickly go through that again.
Sure, absolutely, because that's a really important question. Families come in all shapes and sizes, but when it comes to filing the FAFSA form, thank you, Mr. Hendricks.
You're welcome. I got you.
Look at you.
Good job.
I'm impressed.
The student files the FAFSA with the parent with whom they live the most. So let's just go for an example. Let's say mother and father are divorced and student lives with mom. Then the student files the FAFSA with mom. If mom is remarried, it's that household where that child lives. So then it's mom and her new spouse's income that gets reported on the FAFSA, and dad is simply not reported anywhere. If the child lives with both parents equally, then it's the parent that the parent that provides the most financial support. And how that gets determined is really up to you as a family. You know, you might look at it and say, who's providing the health insurance, who's paying for the cell phone, who's paying for the car insurance, those kind of things. So if it's absolutely equal in terms of time spent, then it becomes who's providing the most support. And again, it's critically important that you understand that it's that household where the child lives. So if the spouse or the parent with whom they live is remarried, then it becomes that household's income, and dad, in the example I had, then dad is off the FAFSA form. So it's just one FAFSA for the student with the household where they live. Now that is the FAFSA form, but earlier we had a question about the CSS profile.
I think Susan froze. Brian, are you still there?
I am still here.
Okay. Susan froze in her mid-sentence right there. Okay. Until she rejoins us, I'm going to also review, and Mr. Hendricks, if you want to back up to the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation, the recording, and the actual PowerPoint. Marquette High, we have posted that in our Naviance account under our financial aid folder, so you can access all of that if you wish to do that. So that will be in our Naviance folder. Mr. Hendricks, do you want to review where you post your resources for DSHA?
Yes, absolutely. So all the presentations that we do is also going to be in our Naviance for everybody. The presentation itself that we're recording tonight is going to be on the DSHA College Center YouTube page. Along with this Q&A, you'll also find the presentation that Susan did pre-recorded in English and Spanish. That'll be on the YouTube page. And then tomorrow for everybody, I'm also going to be sending out the actual presentations via email. So not only will it be in Naviance, you'll have them directly sent to everybody in the email for everyone.
Right. And Marquette High, we will follow up with a recording from our YouTube channel as well to all juniors and seniors, students and parents. It looks like Susan was bumped out of Zoom, so hopefully she can rejoin in a few minutes. I do want to handle one of these questions because I think between Mr. Hendricks and we can probably give our advice, and that is we have noticed too from the college counseling side that there are more and more companies that are offering a, hey, pay us and we are going to help you fill out the FAFSA. I'm going to put my opinion right out there, and I will say this is the free application for federal student aid is free. There is no charge for it, and I would not support a family having to pay somebody just to walk through it. Brian, would you be able to fast forward? I think there's a College Goal Wisconsin.
Yes, I was just going to bring that up. And in the emails that we'll send out, and I know Marquette High, you all have access to this too. There's a program in Wisconsin called College Goal Wisconsin, and that is one of their main things is to help you fill out the FAFSA. So I highly recommend looking at that. I'm pulling up the flyer right now for everybody that will go out tomorrow.
So while he's doing this, this is an organization that is part of our statewide financial aid association, and they offer, this year it'll be virtual. In the past it was in-person workshops where families can bring in their documents, and they have financial aid counselors who are volunteering their time to help a family file and fill out the FAFSA with them in person. This year it'll be virtual, so I know there are probably, I don't know, 4 or 5, look at that, how many dates that there are starting. Well, tonight there was one, but thank you for being with us.
Yeah.
But there are, you can see several more dates, and you can register right there at, it's collegegoalwi.org.
So I know we're texting away with Susan right now. She is trying to get in, I promise. One of the questions I saw that I think Ms. Bennett and I can handle is how do parents log into Naviance? I don't know how Marquette High parents log into Naviance, but at DSHA, parents do not log into Naviance. You have to use your daughter's email address, username, password. That's just kind of how we all set it up. And I like to look at it as a great family fun night where you can all log in around Naviance together and instead of put the board games away and explore what Naviance has to offer together.
Mm-hmm. And that is the same for us, Brian, that families, students, and parents share the same username and password for Naviance. So families for Marquette High, you can find the Naviance link right under our homepage under quick links. And it actually walks you through saying everybody uses the same username and password. Everybody logs in as a student, not as a parent. So the way that we look at it, and I think, Brian, you echoed this, that way both parent and student are seeing the same exact information, that you together are seeing everything that's accessible to students. Parents, you're seeing the same mirror image. Nothing is separated for you. So
we are problem solving right now with Susan. Mrs. Cleary will be relaying, while Susan tries to get back in, she's going to be relaying questions to her and then getting the answers for everybody. So please continue asking your questions. And then we will try and go through them and answer as many as myself and Ms. Bennett can, and as Susan can get in as well.
And a lot of the questions that are posed, these are great questions. And if in case we're certainly not going to be able to get to probably every question tonight, these are excellent questions to ask the financial aid office of the colleges that your son or daughter are looking at as well. The process for, I think, one process that gets, that is always asked is the first step, and Susan did this really, really well in the recorded presentation, is in order to start your FAFSA completion, seniors, I'm just talking to you, so if there are juniors in this is great, you'll be doing this next year, is both student and parent need to create what's called an FSA ID. So when you go to fafsa.ed.gov, the very first thing you're going to see is to create an account and create an FSA ID. The FSA ID basically serves as your electronic PIN. So it's your electronic signature. So it allows you to go through this, but it's both student and parent. And parents, if you have multiple children in college, each student has their own FSA ID number.
So a couple questions coming up with the SAR and what EFC. So EFC is Estimated Family Contribution. So basically you'll get that on your SAR, which is your student aid report. So I'm going to combine a couple questions here. So the student aid report, if you file it electronically, usually you will get that 3 to 5 days after you file. If you file the paper FAFSA, it can take up to 3 weeks. So just another reason where if you're able to fill out the FAFSA online and do that, you'll get your student aid report sooner. And in your student aid report, up in the top right corner, I believe, is where you'll see something called the EFC. That's the estimated family contribution. That is where they do this whole formula, and it comes back with how much they estimate you can pay for college. So that's not saying that, you know, that's a perfect number. It's an estimated number based on your taxes and your assets and everything we talked about from 2019.
I'm going to jump in really quick because one of the questions that was asked, and I am learning that Susan's internet is out at her house, so she's talking me through some answers on my cell phone at the moment. The question asked about, is there a tool available to assess the financial viability of a college in this COVID environment, you know, assuming that some schools may merge or be in trouble in the next few years when our kids are going. Susan is not aware of a tool at this point, and I know that I am not either. I don't know about you, Brian, or Connie, if you've heard of anything. But I think we all agree it's a great question and fair to ask admissions or in the financial aid office as you're talking with universities and colleges. Great question.
Another question that just came up that I feel confident in answering, so hopefully I don't get this wrong, is if you already have a student in college, do you need to create a FAFSA ID for your high school son? Yes, you do. So the way it works is you can have one parent FSA ID, but then each student, you know, say 3 in college, 2 in college, however many, they each need their own FSA ID, and they each need to fill out the FAFSA separately. So you can't just fill out one FAFSA for all your students. Each one needs one separately.
There's often a question too about, you know, is filing earlier helpful? Because for the seniors in our audience tonight, October 1st is when the FAFSA went live for the fall of 2021. So juniors in the audience, October 1st next year is when your FAFSA will go live. What I always recommend our students and families do, look at all of the colleges that your child is applying to, because every college might even have a priority deadline date for filing the FAFSA. They might say, we would love to see families file the FAFSA by February 1st or by January 1st. It does, and I'm going to use the it depends because it can range, and so every college might be different. My rule of thumb is I encourage our families to file the FAFSA anytime between October 1st and early January. A couple of reasons for that. That should meet priority deadlines, but also it results in a timely sharing of a financial aid package. So that, again, the first step, and I know Susan covered this in her recording, the first step in order for a college to consider you for financial aid is you must apply and be admitted, right? That's your first step. So right now we know, Mr. Hendricks, you can shake your head. And so our seniors are busy with their applications right now because that's the first step. A college won't consider you for either scholarship or financial aid until you've been an admitted student. Financial aid can then roll out, you know, sometimes shortly after admission, sometimes for some colleges they start in January. But for the vast majority of our students, you have until May 1st to make your college decision, your college commitment. So if you are getting your financial aid paperwork in and getting your financial aid packages back in February or March of the senior year, that is giving you and your family the time to look at your options, to hear from all of your colleges, and look at things not only for academic fit, social fit, but there's the third leg of financial fit, right? So that's giving you time, and so you're not, you know, delaying that process.
All right, I'm going to unmute Mrs. Cleary right now. Looks like she's getting an answer, so that's good.
This is very entertaining, isn't it?
Okay, I am coming back online here with everyone in Financial Aid Night. Hello again. And I'm keeping my phone here so that Susan can correct me because I'm trying to clarify questions as I'm seeing them here from the group and from Brian as well. So if you have a business and rental property, I think was in parentheses, under an LLC, that is considered a business asset, which would be viewed differently than if a family owned one or two rental properties just under their name, not under the LLC title, that would be considered a second home. Did I say that correctly, Susan? Or a personal asset, excuse me, yes. It would be a personal asset if it's not under the LLC label. And if I misinterpreted a question, please jump in the chat and clarify it so that I can get it to Susan appropriately. Here's one for you, Susan. How widespread are federal loan forgiveness programs?
So I'll jump in real quick while Ms. Cleary is getting this question. Clarification question. If your younger son's in high school, older son's in college, and he has already filled out the FAFSA but didn't qualify for aid, something Susan had mentioned a little bit earlier is what she recommends is that if once you have your younger son applying for college and going through the process, that's when you want to refill out the FAFSA again for both to see if there's any changes in the financial aid process then. So based on what Susan was saying earlier, I would say yes, you do want to have them both fill it out again, in just the hopes that, you know, something can change and colleges will look at, you know, the two college students now instead of the one.
There was a question posted in advance as well about about colleges meeting 100% of the financial need. And let's remember the formula that Susan covered in her recording presentation. It's the cost of attendance. Oh my gosh, I talk with my hands, don't I? Oh my gosh. It's the cost of attendance minus the family's expected family contribution, which is the federal formula, and you subtract those two and you get your estimated financial need. And that's the amount that can change based upon the college's cost, right? You're looking at a public in-state institution, your cost is less than a private institution. So the question was, how many colleges, or what are the percentage of colleges that meet 100% of financial need? And Brian, you're gonna back me up. We're gonna go back to it depends, right?
Yes.
Some colleges with very large endowments and a philosophy of a commitment to meeting financial aid can do that. There are a number of colleges that can't and will put their best financial aid package forward, but it may not meet the full financial need. That's why you will hear Mrs. Cleary and I and Mr. Hendricks say a balanced college list is really important, that you look at we strongly recommend that our young men have at least 2 UWs on their application list to offer that in-state option, so that you have that public institution option, so that you're not scrambling in March or April. So Mrs. Cleary, I see you're off of mute, or Brian, if you want to add some more.
Can I just add one thing to that too?
Please.
Not necessarily meeting need, but it's really important to pay attention to the details of your financial aid report that you get from schools, because there are some schools that will add everything up, and at the very bottom it'll say you owe $0. So I've had students come in and say, great, I get a full ride. But when they go back and look, then you look at each individual line item, there's actually loans in there. So just because at the bottom it might say $0, you still are taking out, $4,500 or $5,500 out in loans that you do have to pay back. So it's just really important that as you're reading your financial aid report from schools, look at each line item specifically and don't just focus on what that bottom number is.
So I'm trying here to have Susan with us via speakerphone. So we'll see how that works. But I will clarify, and we'll get Susan to jump in. An LLC, property under an LLC is considered a business asset. Property owned under a personal name is personal asset. Did I get that, Susan?
That's correct. Can you hear that?
Did you hear Susan?
I did.
Okay. Susan, can you also?
I wanted to jump in on the colleges that meet full need. So I saw that question earlier today, and I was reviewing that. And, you can Google that, colleges that meet full need, and there's some websites. And there's typically probably fewer than 100 institutions that make that promise across the board. And they typically are higher cost private institutions that have very large endowments. So a couple of schools that I noticed that are in the Midwest on that list would be like the University of Chicago, Northwestern, so that ilk, Yale, Harvard, some of those other, Notre Dame was on that list as well. Can people hear that?
Yes. Thank you, Susan.
There was also a question in the chat about how widespread loan forgiveness programs are. Do you want to tackle that, Susan?
Sure. Loan forgiveness programs are not particularly widespread, and they are typically profession-based. So that might be in the nursing career or teacher loan forgiveness that is out there. There's also public service loan forgiveness, which is a student who goes into a public service career after they've finished with their college. So it's not particularly widespread, but there are some programs. Again, it's typically program specific. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention, in some of the new legislation that is coming out that Congress is debating right now, there is some loan forgiveness that I think both the Democrats and the Republicans in their proposed legislation have some indication that they are considering some loan forgiveness. But again, that's right now, it's just proposed legislation. It hasn't been passed. And that is not program specific. That is debt level specific, I guess is the best way to say it.
Hey, Susan, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So, looking back at divorced parents, so after the student's first year, freshman year, student mainly lives on campus for that whole year, not with one parent as in high school. So how does that change, if at all, how parents would fill out the FAFSA for the student's sophomore year?
It really doesn't. It's where that student has, how do I say it? The student reports the FAFSA information with the parent with whom they lived, and if they no longer live with the parent, then it's the one you lived with last. So if you typically reported your mother in your freshman year, and that's really the last household where you really spent most of your time, then you use your mother's household again.
Thank you.
Susan, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. I have a question. If an older child in college is now planning on graduate school, does the FAFSA help with grad school, or does it help toward the younger child's EFC?
Oh, that's a really great question. So remember, FAFSAs are student specific, and for your undergraduate students, if they're typical 18 to 24-year-old, parents' information is included on that FAFSA form. Once the student is going to be in graduate school working on a master's or a PhD, they also can file a FAFSA, but they no longer have to include parental data. So they are their own household and their own income information. If parents are still providing at least 50% of the support for that graduate student, they can include that graduate student on the younger sibling's FAFSA. But the older student, the graduate school student, would just be applying by themselves. Was that clear? Did somebody need more clarification on that one?
I understood that. That's something I learned. Thank you. I did not know that. Let's see what I learned. I think if you are joining us late, thank you. Our presenter's internet connection at home went out, so she is joining us now by speakerphone. We just keep bumbling along today. So, again, we are warriors right here in our midst tonight. So I would say, just in the respective time, maybe we can, Mr. Hendricks or Mrs. Cleary, maybe one or two more questions. just because it's been a long day, I think, to respect of our students and our parents who've been on Zoom all day as well. So let's pick maybe one or two more questions.
Yeah, so I got one that I think a lot of people are curious about, Susan, is how long after a student is actually admitted or accepted to a school can they typically get their financial aid package back from the school?
Oh, that's a great question. And again, the answer is it depends. So it's really important to know that you apply for admission and you file the FAFSA. Now remember, you may not even apply for admission yet for some schools, but you can complete your FAFSA. So there's no reason to wait to file that FAFSA now that it's past October 1st. But once you're admitted and once the FAFSA is there, once those two pieces match up, the school will then put together a financial aid package for you. And this is very, very broad brushstroke, but typically private institutions will get you a financial aid package fairly early. It could be anywhere from November till February or March kind of time frame. And then publics are a little later, maybe that March to April, May range. And if your student is interested in a community college, they may not even get a financial aid package till the summer. So that's very, very broad brushstroke, but it typically kind of follows that sort of a pattern. And again, you can call the financial aid office and ask, when do you anticipate? So if your children are thinking about applying to Marquette, we are aiming to release our first financial aid packages around the 1st of February, if that helps.
That helps us.
I think there's another question that I think is really appropriate as we're navigating the COVID environment, and that is if a student is offered merit scholarship aid and then decides to take a gap year between high school and freshman year, can they still get that same aid and or merit scholarships when they start?
Oh, very important question that you ask the admission office.
Mm-hmm.
You have to get that clarified by the admission office before your student commits to that gap year.
Mm-hmm.
And Susan, can you clarify that the merit aid may be there, but if my child takes a year off, I would have to refile the FAFSA for the following year?
You do have to refile the FAFSA every year. It's available on October 1st, but it is required that you file a new one every year.
Thank you.
All right. Yes.
Can I just add that,
Yes.
that Lee put a note in the chat that says this has been the best Zoom chat of the day. I think the four of us needed to see that, so thank you.
Thank you, Lee.
I'm really happy that someone feels that way, because this is not how I expected the night to go.
Not at all.
It is 2020. We just roll with everything, right?
That's how 2020 is. We roll with it. Thank you for everybody for rolling with us tonight, especially as we had to switch Zoom links out on you, as Susan's internet went out. Thank you all so much for being patient and asking some really great questions. Susan, we want to just one more time, a huge thank you for you taking time out of your Wednesday night to come chat with all of us. We hope you all learned a lot of great information. And if you want to go back and watch this again, because you want to pick something up, or like I said, it's a great Friday movie night, turn Netflix off. Both Marquette High and DSHA will be passing the link out for the video, along with some other resources. If you see up on screen, there's a couple links that the presentation will get sent out to everybody, so you can have these links. But the free application for federal student aid, I just do want to point out that's FAFSA.ed.gov or FAFSA.gov also works. It is not FAFSA.com. It is not FAFSA.org. I've had a couple of students try that. Those are not what you want. You want FAFSA.gov. The CSS profile, that's run by College Board, so you can get that at cssprofile.collegeboard.org. The selective service registration, which is out there for all of our Marquette High friends, that's sss.gov, and then College Goal Wisconsin. As just a reminder, that is where you can get free FAFSA help, is the College Goal Wisconsin. And the flyer for College Goal Wisconsin is going to be sent out to everybody as well tomorrow. So Mrs. Bennett, Mrs. Cleary, thank you for joining all of us today. All our parents and students, thank you. Thank you so much for coming. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Have a great Wednesday night and a great rest of your October.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.